Welcome to the Lyster Health Talks podcast. Listen in as the team focuses on relevant, relatable health content that empowers your health and the readiness of the force. We are officially clearing the runway for a special mini-series dedicated entirely to aviation medicine. Over the next few episodes, we're diving into the critical role aviation medicine plays in keeping our pilots and crews mission ready and showing you exactly how our care keeps you in the air. Let's prep for takeoff as we talk aviation medicine here at Fort Rucker, the home of Army Aviation.
Hello, Fort Rucker. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Leah Steder, the Director and Commander of Lyster Army Health Clinic and the host of our podcast, Lyster Health Talks. Every day, aviation depends on healthy, ready, and resilient soldiers to accomplish the mission. That's why we're launching this Aviation Health series. From flight physicals and waivers, mental health, and injury prevention, we'll provide you practical information designed to help keep our aviators healthy, informed, and mission ready. In today's episode, we're tackling common myths. One of the most common questions flight surgeons hear isn't about a flight physical or medication. It's this: if I tell you this, am I going to lose my flight status? Today, we're talking about the myths, the facts, and what every aviator should know before they walk through the clinic doors. Joining me today is Major Pettinari and Miss Liz Johnson-Bailey.
Hi, I'm Liz Johnson-Bailey. I'm an aerospace medicine physician assistant.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Major Daniella Pettinari. I'm the Deputy Commander for Clinical Services, and I'm an aeromedical psychologist.
As you both are well aware, aviators are in constant fear of being grounded for medical issues. Let's start with the biggest myth you hear from aviators. What is the most common misconception about flight status?
That when you come to the flight surgeon's office, we are there to ground you. That is absolutely not the case. Actually, we spend way more time trying to keep you up in the air safely than I've ever spent trying to ground someone. Grounding someone is actually easy because all I have to do is go, you're grounded. It takes 10 to 20 times more work to keep you flying safely. Flying is actually a privilege. It's not a right. You have to meet criteria to fly, not only mental criteria, but physical criteria. It's regulation bound. There's quality metrics in all of it. If someone comes to me and says, hey, this is what I've got going on, I have due diligence to figure out what's going on and make sure that you can still do your job safely. I'll spend way more time trying to work with you through that problem than I ever will to tell you, hey, we can't do this anymore.
I know a lot of my friends that are aviators and folks I've been around think that anytime they get seen by medical, they're going to get grounded. But in my experience in a cabin within Lyster is most conditions can be worked and keep pilots in the air.
Absolutely. The military has spent so much time investing into that training to get you through flight training, whether it's an ATC, a crew member, or a pilot. They want that return on investment. We don't come out ahead if we train you to become a pilot and then ground you and you never fly again. We want to get that time out of you and get that experience out of you.
I know you and Major Pettinari have seen patients a lot and have extensive experience. Why do you think so many aviation myths continue to circulate?
Once something starts, it's terribly hard to stop that information train. It's the barracks lawyers, the E4 mafia. We still have those rumors from when I joined. Hey, you don't want to tell somebody something. And, it's 50 years later and we still know these things.
I think from a mental health standpoint, there's always been a lot of stigma around mental health that's created some concern with seeking help. But from a flight standpoint, we encourage folks who are having increased difficulties coping to come in sooner than later before it becomes a diagnosis so that we can keep you flying. And I think in terms of mental health, the biggest myth is if I come to mental health, I'm going to be grounded immediately and I'm never going to fly again. And that's just not the case. I put more people back up in the air than I do ground. And a lot of that is folks are coming in, they're getting their treatment, they're improving, and they're just getting themselves back to a healthy and safe status. And so I think that really has to be articulated and to the community is that if you come and get help and there's improvement in your mental status, you are going to get back up. And so I just hope that that's something that we can continue to push out to the aviation community.
What do you both think are some medical issues aviators commonly worry about that don't often end up being major problems? I know you've already mentioned mental health, but there's quite a few others that I think some folks worry about.
Probably things that are very common, like back pain. I'm trying to think of things that are really common, that digestive issues, headaches.
TBIs, I would say,
TBIs
is definitely
are
a big one.
Yeah. Immune system issues. You know, we are seeing a larger populations with things like Crohn's disease, irritable bowel disease, autoimmune disorders.
Can you explain the difference as well between temporary grounding and permanent grounding?
So temporary grounding would be that you are grounded while we are addressing something that maybe you're on a medication or you're acutely ill, that we're going to take care of this here and now. I have a cold, I can't clear my ears, so you're going to be grounded until you can get that capability to clear your ears back. Now, you may also be temporarily grounded for several months at a time while you're being worked up for a condition. A grounding that becomes more permanent is if you have been grounded for 365 days. That is considered a permanent grounding. And then at that point, you will be considered for suspension from flight service. Now, if you have a medical condition that keeps you grounded for 365 days, you will be considered for suspension. But realize that suspensions are not always permanent. It may be called a permanent suspension, but should your condition be improved, you can be put back up after a period of time.
Is there ever a circumstance in which permanent suspension can be reversed?
Well, permanent suspension can be reversed when there has a preponderance of evidence that the condition has resolved or stabilized, a new aeromedical summary and waiver request has been submitted and approved. You can be returned to flight service. You will not be reimbursed flight pay for the period of time that you were suspended, but once that reversal is done and you are granted a waiver to return to flight service, your flight pay will be reinstated.
I know we've mentioned it several times during this podcast, but we have hopefully a lot of new listeners that aren't pilots listening to this yet. But what role do waivers play?
So a waiver says that you have a disqualifying medical condition that we know about. The condition has been evaluated medically by the medical experts. We have taken all the information about that disqualifying medical condition. We have said it's either treated or the catastrophic consequence it could have has been mitigated enough that we will now say you can fly with this waiver for your disqualifying condition. So now you are disqualified with waiver that you may fly.
I think another important thing to note about that is that if folks are going through the waiver process for that condition, for some of the conditions, they can be placed on a temporary upslip. And so I would encourage folks to speak with their flight surgeon or their aeromedical psychologist to see if that condition would qualify for a temporary upslip.
Correct. There are guidelines for each waiverable condition, different medications. Some may have temporary criteria that you can have an upslip while you're working through the process, and some don't. They're all individual.
Now you mentioned medication just a minute ago. Will you kind of talk a little bit about what aviators should know before starting a new medication?
They should talk to their flight surgeon every time.
Now, if they get referred off base or go to the ER and get a medication, what should they do?
Talk to their flight surgeon.
And that's where you've heard about in one of our recent episodes. That's where flight surgeon of the day comes in.
Right. And that regulation where it says that I must notify my flight surgeon of treatment, AR 40-8, 100-105. I must notify my flight surgeon of any treatment given by a non-flight surgeon.
And just to remind everyone, flight surgeon of the day is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 8 to 11.
They can also notify their flight surgeon through that circular messaging.
Patient portal, through the patient portal.
Can you explain the difference between temporary restrictions and permanent disqualification?
So a temporary restriction means that you cannot fly. You are downed for a period of time. Now, you are technically downed until you get an upslip. A permanent disqualification means you cannot fly until you get a waiver that says you can get back up. Now, if you have a down slip that says you are temporarily grounded for a week, it is for a week or until you get an upslip. A permanent disqualification, you will not get a new upslip until you have a waiver that grants you to come back up.
Lyster, in particular, has a lot of new aviators that will do initial flight physicals for the first time. I think we see a lot of folks that might be getting guidance that we can only see their records once they join the Army or 18. Can you give a little bit of advice or talk a little bit about what you guys look at and some of the advances in technology?
Yeah, so I think the medical record system has advanced pretty significantly in terms of what we can see. I would say about 10 years ago, we weren't able to see somebody's history prior to their military service. Now we get summaries indicating diagnoses from childhood up until when they join the military. And so from my perspective, when I'm doing an Aeromed psych evaluation, I'm looking for somebody to be truthful in their disclosure of their history. When folks come in and don't disclose significant events, such as a hospitalization for a suicide attempt or suicidal ideations, that really, for me, brings up questions of integrity, which plays into our Aeromedical Adaptability APL.
Okay, so what I'd like to expand on transparency. So what 10 years ago, what you're speaking about is we had a closed medical system. Now we have an electronic health record, and that encompasses about 80% of the worldwide health records. So that means when you were 2 and your mom took you to the emergency room for an ear infection, we have access to that. That means when you were 12 and your parents divorced and you needed to speak to a counselor because you were having problems at school, we have access to that. That means when you were 16 and you tore your meniscus and you had a concussion playing soccer, we have access to that. So when you fill out the 2807-1, which is your report of medical history, it has questions that says, do you now or have you ever? We expect transparency in those questions. And now, we know that we are looking for transparency because when we see this, I'm going to tell you that I also need to give you transparency. So when you answer these questions and then I look through your medical record, I'm probably going to ask, hey, I saw in your record when you were 16, you were on this medication for 2 years. And sometimes I got it. We don't always know. Maybe your parents didn't tell you were taking a medication for something, but I'm going to kind of ask you, hey, do you remember taking a medication every day for this? And we're looking for that. There are going to be conditions that may disqualify you, but that doesn't mean you won't get a waiver for it. The transparency comes in, do you willfully not disclose this, or are we going to have a conversation and work through this together? It's a partnership. And even if you don't think it's something important, like you may think, I had asthma and I grew out of it. We still need to know about it. There are conditions that may not be very important because you kind of gutted through it, but it's something we still need to know about.
I think that's where some of the hang-up results from is that folks are like, well, it's not bothering me anymore. I'm over it, so It's no longer an issue. But we're really looking at the entirety of their life.
No, great. And I think you said it at the beginning of this series is that you always try to find a way to get to yes to keep aviators in the air. But before we wrap up, let's play a little lightning round of fact or fiction.
All right.
Myth or fact? If I report an injury, I'll never fly again.
Myth.
Myth or fact? If I see behavioral health, I'll lose my flight status.
Myth.
Flight surgeons are looking for reasons to ground aviators.
Myth.
Most medical concerns are easier to manage when addressed early.
Fact.
Seeking help is not a sign of weakness.
Fact.
Today, we talked about some of the biggest myths surrounding flight status, medical care, and what happens when an aviator walks into a flight surgeon's office. The reality is that aviation medicine isn't designed to take aviators out of the cockpit. It's designed to keep them healthy, keep them safe, and when necessary, help them return to flight as quickly as possible. The most dangerous words in aviation medicine often aren't, "you're grounded." They're, "I didn't want to say anything." Whether it's nagging injury, trouble sleeping, stress, fatigue, or concerns about your mental health, early conversations almost always lead to better outcomes for you, your crew, and the mission. Remember, your flight surgeon isn't simply the person who signs your physical. They're part of your aviation team, your advocate, and a resource dedicated to keeping Army aviation ready. Before we close out today, I'd like each of you to answer, if every aviator at Fort Rucker or that is listening to us from other locations can hear one message from you today, what would it be?
Mine would be one word, and it would go back to what Liz was saying is transparency.
I'm going to say transparency too. It's my favorite. So
Flies
I'll
up.
take two
My
words:
words are
transparency
things.
and partnership.
Thank you both for joining us again. And until next time, this is Lyster Army Health Talks.
And that wraps up another episode of our Aviation Medicine mini-series on Lyster Health Talks. Stay healthy, Fort Rucker.